Hello everybody, what's up?
Pope Francis, born Jorge Mario Bergoglio on December 17, 1936, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, is the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church and the first Pope from the Americas. The first from the Southern Hemisphere and the first Jesuit to hold the position. He was elected on March 13, 2013, following the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. Known for his humility, progressive views on social issues, and commitment to interfaith dialogue, Pope Francis has focused his papacy on themes such as mercy, compassion, care for the poor, and environmental stewardship. His 2015 encyclical Laudato Si called for urgent action on climate change and emphasized the moral dimensions of environmental issues. Pope Francis has also worked to reform the Vatican bureaucracy and address the sexual abuse crisis within the Church, though critics argue that more decisive action is needed. He often emphasizes inclusivity and a pastoral approach over doctrinal rigidity, encouraging a church that is bruised, hurting and dirty because it has been out on the streets, rather than one clinging to comfort and tradition. Fluent in several languages and widely respected across religious and secular communities, Pope Francis remains a pivotal figure in both spiritual and global conversations. Early life and priesthood. Pope Francis was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio to Italian immigrant parents in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Before joining the priesthood, he studied chemistry and worked as a chemical technician. He joined the Society of Jesus, Jesuits, in 1958, was ordained a priest in 1969, and later became the Archbishop of Buenos Aires in 1998. Known for living simply, even as a cardinal he used public transportation and lived in a modest apartment, he quickly gained a reputation for humility and a deep concern for the poor. Election as Pope. Following the historic resignation of Pope Benedict XVI in 2013, Bergoglio was elected Pope during the papal conclave on March 13, 2013. He chose the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, reflecting his desire for a church that serves the marginalized and cares for creation. Key themes of his papacy: 1. Mercy and compassion. Francis declared a Jubilee Year of Mercy in 2015 and frequently calls on the Church to focus on forgiveness, inclusion, and kindness, especially toward those who feel alienated or judged by religion. 2. Social justice and the poor. He emphasizes the preferential option for the poor, a Catholic social teaching that places the needs of the poor and vulnerable first. He has criticized global capitalism, income inequality, and what he calls a throwaway culture. 3. Environmental stewardship. In Laudato Si 2015, Francis became the first pope to dedicate an entire encyclical to environmental issues. He framed climate change as a moral issue, calling for a collective response that prioritizes the poor and future generations. 4. Church reform. He's made efforts to clean up Vatican finances and has restructured several Vatican departments. He's also tried to increase accountability in handling clerical sexual abuse, though opinions vary on how effective these changes have been. 5. Synodality and inclusion. Francis is reshaping the way the Church makes decisions, promoting synodality, a more inclusive, consultative approach involving clergy and laypeople. He has opened discussions on issues like married priests, women in church leadership, and LGBTQ+ inclusion, often emphasizing listening over judging. Controversies and challenges. While many admire Francis for his openness and humility, he has faced criticism from both conservatives and progressives. Conservatives argue he is too liberal and vague on doctrine. Progressives wish he would go further, especially on issues like women's ordination and LGBTQ+ rights. He's also been scrutinized for how the Vatican has handled sexual abuse cases during his papacy. Legacy and global impact. Pope Francis has redefined the tone of the papacy in the 21st century. His outreach to Muslims, Jews, atheists, and marginalized groups reflects a commitment to building bridges rather than walls. Even beyond the Catholic Church, his influence as a global moral voice has been profound. Personal traits and style. Pope Francis is widely known for his modesty, approachability, and sense of humor. He lives in a modest guesthouse, Casa Santa Marta, instead of the lavish papal apartments. Wears simple white papal garments, and often mingles with crowds without heavy security. He's known to pick up the phone and personally call people who write him letters, something almost unheard of from a pope. He avoids ideological language and prefers storytelling and metaphor, often drawing from everyday life. One of his most quoted phrases is, "Who am I to judge?" in response to a question about gay Catholics, signaling a tone of pastoral sensitivity over doctrinal harshness. Theology and teaching approach. Francis comes from a Jesuit background, which emphasizes discernment, careful spiritual reflection before decisions, social justice and service, and engagement with the world, rather than separation from it. Unlike more dogmatic approaches, Francis tends to focus on the spirit of the gospel over legalistic interpretations. He prioritizes pastoral care, meeting people where they are, over strict enforcement of rules. His goal seems to be a church that's more of a field hospital after battle, as he once described it, rather than a courtroom. He also frequently criticizes clericalism, the idea that priests and bishops are a privileged, untouchable class. He encourages humility and servant leadership within the clergy. Major diplomatic and symbolic acts. Francis is not just a religious leader but also a major global diplomat. Some notable moments include 2014. Played a key role in helping to re-establish diplomatic relations between the United States and Cuba. 2016. Met with Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church, the first such meeting in nearly 1,000 years. 2021. Visited Iraq, marking the first time a pope visited the country, bringing messages of peace and coexistence to Christian and Muslim communities. 2020. Released the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, calling for global solidarity, friendship, and an end to war and populist nationalism. He has frequently condemned war and arms trade, and advocated for migrants and refugees, often washing the feet of migrants during Holy Week. View on hot-button issues. LGBTQ+ people. Francis affirms the dignity of LGBTQ+ individuals and has called for civil protections for same-sex couples, not church marriages but legal safeguards. He has supported ministries that serve LGBTQ+ Catholics and recently approved blessings for same-sex couples under specific pastoral circumstances, though still not equating them to marriage. Women in the Church. He has appointed a record number of women to Vatican leadership roles and established commissions to study the possibility of women deacons. Still, he upholds the Church's teaching against women priests, yet the tone and level of dialogue have shifted under him. Sexual abuse crisis. He has apologized publicly, met with survivors, and created new mechanisms to hold bishops accountable. However, critics argue that implementation is inconsistent and more transparency is needed. Recent developments and the future. As of 2025, Pope Francis is 88 years old and facing increasing health challenges, including mobility issues. Despite this, he remains active, issuing new documents, traveling internationally, and leading synods that shape the Church's future. He's made it clear that resignation is possible if his health prevents him from continuing, following the precedent set by Benedict XVI. The Synod on Synodality, a multi-year global consultation process, ongoing into 2025, is one of his most ambitious projects. It asks Catholics around the world to share their thoughts on how the Church should evolve, potentially reshaping governance and inclusion at every level. A pope for the Global South. Pope Francis represents a significant shift in the Church's historical power center. For centuries, popes came from Europe, mostly Italy. But Francis is the first Latin American pope, and this is huge for the Global South, where the majority of the world's Catholics now live. His roots in Argentina, a country shaped by dictatorship, economic collapse, and social injustice, deeply inform his worldview. He speaks regularly against economic inequality, globalization that excludes the poor, exploitation by multinational corporations, the rise of nationalism and populist politics in many ways. He gives voice to parts of the world that have historically been underrepresented in Vatican power structures. Dove bridge builder across religions, Pope Francis has prioritized interfaith dialogue like no pope before him. He's built historic relationships with Islam. He signed the document on human fraternity with Grand Imam Ahmed El Tayeb in 2019 in Abu Dhabi, calling for peace and mutual respect. Judaism. He has strong ties with Jewish leaders and continues the tradition of dialogue and reconciliation. Eastern Orthodoxy. His meetings with Patriarch Bartholomew and Patriarch Kirill broke centuries of silence between churches divided since 1054. Non-believers. Francis has addressed atheists and agnostics with respect, emphasizing shared values like dignity, peace, and justice. His belief: we build bridges, not walls. Scroll major writings, encyclicals and documents. Evangelii Gaudium, The Joy of the Gospel. 2013. His vision for a missionary church that goes to the margins and lives the joy of the gospel. Laudato Si. 2015. Groundbreaking encyclical on climate change, environmental justice, and care for our common home. Amoris Laetitia, The Joy of Love. 2016. Addresses family life, marriage, divorce, and remarriage. It opens the door to pastoral flexibility, allowing local bishops to respond to complex situations.
Bye bye.